Joe Francavilla, Deputy Executive Director of the Maryland Democratic Party here. Want to give you a special intro and some housekeeping for this episode of Burn the Talking Points. Obviously, we record this on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but huge news broke last night with the tariffs and just the stock market tanking, job losses, a lot going on. So while we don't talk about it in this episode, we do want to let you know we are going to be recording a special episode with Comptroller Learman early next week, which will release probably next Thursday, so we can get a full picture of what tariffs mean both for the country and for Maryland. We also are going to have another special episode dropping next Tuesday with a huge special guest. Can't tell you who it is yet, but they have a huge hand in what goes on in the legislative session, and they will be stopping by, and we'll be dropping that episode next Tuesday right after the end of the legislative session. So on today's episode, we are going to be talking about the Democratic momentum that we're feeling for the first time in a while. I'm feeling a little bit of energy after what happened with Cory Booker's filibuster, what we saw happen in Florida and Wisconsin. And so Maryland Democratic Party Executive Director Karen Darkes is going to stop by and talk to us about what it means for the Democratic Party in the moment that we're feeling right now. And then the bulk of our episode is the education episode. We have Pat Fannon from the State Superintendents Association, and then Randi Weingarten, a huge get of National AFT, to join and talk about what's actually going to happen if Trump dismantles the Department of Education, and what does that mean for Maryland, and what does that mean for our nation? So really great guest. It's an action-packed episode, but I did just want to stop by with some housekeeping to let you know we saw the tariffs. We know it's not great, but we are going to do a full episode next week. So before we hop into the interviews, make sure you smash that subscribe button. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you're watching this, and send your feedback. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you don't like. We listen to all the emails. We hear them. We see them. And this is really about making sure we're producing the product that works for you. So we're going to jump into my conversation with Executive Director Karen Darkes, and then Pat Fannon, and then Randi Weingarten. So thanks for tuning in. Episode 5, Burn the Talking Points. So, Karen, let's jump into it. As a Democrat, how are you feeling right now, just taking the last 24 hours into account? And let's take the last 48 because people are listening to this on Thursday.
Well, thank you for allowing me time to be on the show. I know that, the schedule is tight, so I'm glad you could squeeze me in. But I will say, as a Democrat and as a Jersey girl, I'm very, very excited about the last 24, or should I say 25 hours that Cory Booker stood on the Senate floor. I mean, I feel like a lot of our constituents and people that we deal with have been really thirsty for Democrats to do something, to really be in touch with what is going on the ground.
And that anger. And
to capitalize on that anger. And I feel like what Senator Booker said is that, the people want us to recognize that this is a crisis. And he used, his platform to really demonstrate that elected officials hear what's happening and we can do something.
And so for context for the audience, if you did not see, Cory Booker held the longest filibuster in American history, where he spoke for over 25 hours straight, with some questions from Democratic senators, including Angela Alsobrooks and Chris Van Hollen. Shout out to both of them for being part of this historic event. But it wasn't just 25 hours of reading the rules of blackjack or reading Green Eggs and Ham. This was 25 hours straight of calling the alarm of the creeping authoritarianism that we're seeing. And so as a New Jersey native, which I'm glad that you're able to slip in there right off the bat, what does it mean to have Cory Booker specifically as, I'm going to say this poetically, the younger generation of leaders in the Senate kind of take that mantle and run with it?
I mean, I think it really dates back to kind of who he is and how he kind of got into it. Like I said, I'm from New Jersey, and there was a period where I interned for our former senior senator, Bob Menendez, when Senator Booker was still mayor of Newark.
Mm-hmm.
And we were literally here that he was saving cats out of trees as the mayor of Newark. So this is very on brand for Senator Booker. And then also when I used to work for Congressman Cummings or even Lucy McBath or anything like that, he was always the first person to be like, yes, I will do it. I will headline the fundraiser. I will help. It just really shows.
And he's done it in Maryland.
He's done it in Maryland. I mean, he came and spoke for the gala a couple years ago. And, you know, he's just truly a team player. And I think that shows a lot. And I think that, you know, we hosted our weekend of action in Maryland earlier in March, and we had people protesting and rallying all around the state. And it's great that we were able to do that. But I think that it was really important for him to show that legislators can do it too in their way.
And they're hearing hearing from the base. I could not agree more. It's really good to see the fight. So Democrats, you're listening, like, electeds are hearing you. Keep up the call. Keep calling into Republican offices across the country. They need to hear from you too. But the senators are starting to use a lot of the mechanisms of government and trying to raise awareness of what is happening. At the end of the day, we still need to make sure we can get those votes. But we're seeing progress. So more. Keep it up. So let's talk about elections.
Yeah, what I was going to say was I feel like something that we've all kind of been looking for post January 20th is for everyone to kind of play their part and play it well, right? So just like one more thing on Cory Booker is like, I feel like our legislators, our members of Congress and everything need to do their jobs to be a stopgap against the Republicans and, you know, even our legislators here in Annapolis, making sure that the things that we value the most are being protected here in the state, like making sure that they're playing their role and they're doing it to the best of their abilities. And then those of us who are on the other side of the ball, the political side, are doing what we're supposed to do. And I feel like yesterday was a great demonstration of that. I feel like yesterday, you know, we saw that in Wisconsin when we were able to get that judge elected, you know,
by 10 points.
By 10 points. I mean, and then Florida, I think, you know, it's not lost on any of us that we were going to lose those seats, but we didn't lose them in the way that we could have, right?
No, I think it was in Florida 1, a 17-point swing towards Democrats, and in Florida 6, an 18-point swing. So just to be clear, we're not celebrating a loss. We're celebrating the on-the-ground effort of activists who peeled off a lot of people who voted for Republicans previously to vote for Democrats or got more Democrats out there. So that's the energy I think we're like, these are the data points that we haven't been able to point to that we can now start pointing to. Is like, I mean, we call it burn the talking points. So what the hell? Let's just be honest here. Like the last couple of months, there haven't been a ton of things to point to say like, this is what the Democratic Party is fighting on. This is like, there have been moments, there have been individuals, there's been things. This is the first time I think I've felt things talking to each other and kind of multiple things happening at once. We're gonna have more like hills to climb. I want to be clear. We're not saying, hey, look, everything's great now. We're gonna win in 26, 28. Don't worry about it. It still sucks. Donald Trump is doing terrible, horrible things. But this is the first time I feel like things are moving in a direction where we can start to see, okay, maybe there is a path forward we can start charting. I don't know how you're feeling.
No, I agree. I feel like what's been frustrating is I think those of us who have been doing this for a long time, we all know that somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose an election. And I think something that's been frustrating, at least for me personally and for some of the people that I've been talking to, is that we had to be prepared for the moment if we did not win the presidential election, right? I know that the party, like everyone in the ecosystem, knew that the Democratic Party was going to have to find a new chair and resort all of that. But, and then, you know, there's a lot of new members of Congress, but there are a lot of members that were there for Trump 1, a lot of members that have been there for a long time. And I think a frustrating thing was that, okay, why is everyone trying to scramble to figure out what we're going to do to react to this?
Yeah.
And I feel like we're finally, to your point, getting into that groove of like, okay, the right hand knows what they're doing, the left hand knows what they're doing, and now we're figuring out how to do it together to create results, and so that everyone can see that the Democrats are doing something. And then, and then we also have the courts, and Wisconsin, that victory in Wisconsin also shined a big light on the fact that we have so many Dem AGs who I think just filed a lawsuit yesterday. 23 of the Democratic AGs filed a lawsuit. So we see all the pieces finally working together. And it sucks that, we're almost at 100 days Trump's in office at the end of this month for it to come together. But I'm glad that it is coming together. And as, people are losing their jobs and people are just really feeling the effects of this, it's a great time for the Democrats to really swoop back in and remind everyone that we've got their backs.
So let's talk about then action, because at the end of the day, we need to keep taking action. And the road ahead still is bumpy. There are still going to be growing pains. This is a big tent where people are going to agree and disagree, and we still don't, we're still charting that path forward, but we're seeing the steps being taken. But what can people do like now to continue to get involved? I know there's some things coming up, but can you talk a little bit about what people should do if they're hearing it before this weekend?
Yeah, I think that, when I think about times like this, I often think about like the civil rights movement and how different people had different roles, and they all worked together to achieve the ultimate goal, right? And I think that, people who are able-bodied and able to go march and go protest should join, the hands-off rallies that are happening all across, the country, and particularly in Washington, D.C., and there's 10 happening in Maryland just this weekend. So if you're able-bodied and able to do that, then you should do that, right?
And we'll put this in the show notes, but it's handsoff2025.com.
And, for those of us who aren't being impacted by, financially by what's happening, and you do have money to give to support causes like the Maryland Democratic Party or to support, local, organizations or candidates, you should do that. You should continue to do that because I know I've been speaking to a lot of colleagues around the country who run organizations and parties, and everyone is struggling right now financially to do the work that is needed to meet this moment. So if you're able to do that, do that. And then, also just making phone calls, sharing Instagram posts, sharing TikTok, sharing, Twitter posts, everything means something. There is something that everyone can do, and it all matters, and it all helps move the needle. So the idea that you can't do anything is it's not real in 2025. There's letter writing, there's calling, your members of Congress. Even just calling Cory Booker's office to say thank you. That's something that is motivating. You calling your senators, a number, I hope that I'm right when I say all the Democratic senators asked a question of Cory Booker yesterday, including a attendant.
Yep.
So even just calling them to say thank you for standing up, so they understand that this is what you would like to see more of, goes a long way. As these elected leaders or people who serve constituency bases, sometimes we want to hear that feedback, good and bad. So continue to be engaged in whatever way you can.
I think that is incredibly insightful, because it's important that you tell them what you want, but then when they do what you want, it's important to reinforce that so they continue doing what you want. So we'll drop it in the show notes. It's handsoff2025.com if people want to go to any of the rallies. Also mddems.org/donate if you want to throw a few bucks our way to help continue the programming that we have going on here, including candidate recruitment, including winning local elections. There's a lot of big ones coming up. But
then burn the talking points.
And burn the talking points. Yeah, we gotta keep that going. And so Karen Darkes, Executive Director, appreciate you making an appearance. I know we will see you back here many times over the course of filming, but also stick around for our conversation on education with Mary Pat Fannon from the Superintendents Association, focused on Maryland, and then Randi Weingarten, focused on the national picture for education. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for sticking with us here on Burn the Talking Points. Our guest today, Mary Pat Fannon, is someone I have known for years. We were in the fight together for the blueprint. for Maryland's future. She is the executive director of the Public School Superintendents Association of Maryland, has worked in local government, has worked in state government in the Speaker's office, is a Speaker Bush alum, and really has her hands in anything schools, anything education. You'll find Mary Pat as part of that conversation. So we're really grateful that she joined us today. And unfortunately, it's a great day for you to join us because the Trump administration seems to be taking a wrecking ball to both federal education policy and also Maryland's budget specifically. So while I'm excited that you're here to talk about it, it's really depressing that we have to talk about it specifically today. So let's get into it a little bit. The Trump administration has put forward an executive order saying we're going to dismantle the Department of Education. What does that mean for Maryland?
Well, I think we're all waiting to see how this all shakes out. But big picture is the Department of Ed has authority over Title I, 26 million kids, IDEA, I think 7 million. They've run the nation's report card. They do the student loan refinancing. And they have already let go of half of their staff, including, what I thought was interesting, the attorneys who gave them legal advice that they could do this. So half of them are gone. So when you and I talked initially about doing this, I was like, we don't really know exactly what's going to happen on the ground. And then stuff happened.
Yeah. So just to kind of dive into that from 30,000 foot into some of the examples you gave, you talked about IDEA, which is special education. Mm-hmm. That is one that I think is near and dear to the hearts of many of our listeners and watchers, as well as I'm a former teacher. I taught students with special needs in every class I had. They're just cutting funding, in theory, for students with special needs is one on the chopping block. And they're probably cutting money for students who are considered low income. And just let's talk a little bit about how they might do this, because I think there is a little bit of they're going to try and play some shell games. They're going to say, we're not cutting it, we're sending it back to the states.
Right.
In reality, what's probably going to happen is they're going to do something called block granting, which means normally they give us, I'm going to make up numbers. These are not real numbers. I'm making them up for sake of argument here. They give us $1 billion and it gets spread between 24 local jurisdictions. And, Baltimore City has more students that are considered low income than Frederick County. So Baltimore City will get 300 million of that pie. Frederick will get 100 million. Again, we're just making up numbers. So what they might do, that $1 billion, they might say, hey, Maryland, we're actually going to give you 500 million to spend on special education, but you get to control all of it. It's all yours now. That's a cut. Can you talk about what the impacts are, like the decisions superintendents are going to have to make, what the state legislators are going to have to make when they start doing this block granting?
Yeah, I think the way that the Trump administration has said that they're going to handle this is that these are formula funds, right? And they're going to block grant them based on what the formulas are now, and they're going to parcel them out to different agencies. So Treasury would, in theory, cut us a check for the number of students that we have. So we'll see if that happens.
And they notoriously tell the truth.
Yeah, right. But the other big thing is, so if you are going, we've been sort of thinking about this, and if it really is a formula and it's going to be based on numbers, right, then that's great. But the thing that the department also does is the Office of Civil Rights. Mm-hmm. And so let's say they do cut our IDEA money. Your recourse would be special education, sorry. Your recourse would be to go back to that office and to the Justice Department and say they're not funding us properly. Well, they've closed 6 of the 11 civil rights offices apparently around the country. So, in a state like Maryland, where that we do the right thing for the most part, right?
We try to do
the right thing. Block grants are not as scary because at least we're going to be as equitable, and we have our own formulas. But in other states, you've got voiceless families of kids with severe special needs that aren't going to get the services they deserve.
And so it might not be as scary in Maryland, where we have, Democratic governance who are committed to public schools, which we're going to talk more about the blueprint in a minute. But it's terrifying if the Trump administration does what I think they're going to do. And then, one, they say they're going to start with the formula, and the formula says $1 billion for Maryland. And then Republicans say, hey, we need to cut $5 trillion from the budget because we want to give tax breaks to billionaires. Well, I think an ample place to cut must be education funding. So let's take Maryland down from $1 billion to $750 million. Let's take Texas down from $20 billion to $10 billion. Let's take California down to $4 billion. And they're just going to make choices. And blue states, I think, are going to get hurt more because the Trump administration notoriously doesn't care about blue states. But also, this is where they're going to find a ton of money for their tax break scheme.
Yep.
Am I right to be terrified?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a horrible thought. And it's just like the immigration issues, right? It's where you sit.
Yeah.
It's where your families are. And I think the thing that scares me the most is the culture of chaos that they've created. I didn't really have a great moniker for it, and I heard someone say that, and I'm like, that's exactly what this is. It's like just throwing all these things in the air and saying, figure it out. And thank goodness we have a state that's going to look after these vulnerable populations. But we are part of a country of people that we want to protect across the board.
And there's also the difficulty as a state. Again, we want to do the right thing. We rely on federal partnership to make sure that we're working together to do what we need to do. And when that federal partnership falls away, that federal expertise falls away, the repercussions for kids and educators is real, and it's immediate. Like, you only get to do kindergarten once. You only get to do 7th grade once. Like, if we mess it up for even a grade band of kids, a generation of kids, like, those repercussions ripple. And I think we saw that with COVID. Like, the repercussions last, and it doesn't feel like the Trump administration cares. And maybe that's me on my soapbox.
No, I mean, I think if you look at, desegregation, right, and it wasn't until the federal government really stepped in with those states that weren't desegregating their schools. And so if you take the other route, it makes you nervous.
Let's talk about another thing that the Trump administration is doing, which actually hit the newspapers, I think, this morning. And if you're listening to this on Thursday, we're recording on Tuesday. So it's probably about 2 days old by now. But the Department of Education sent the state of Maryland and all states a letter on March 28th, which I believe was a Friday. What I saw was the state of Maryland received the email at 5:03 p.m. and it said, we're essentially not going to reimburse any of your funds which aren't submitted before 5 p.m. that same day. So they sent the letter after the deadline. And I'm going to say this in layman's terms. You tell me where I'm wrong, and let's talk about it. Federal government gave Maryland a bunch of money federally to respond to COVID, to do a lot of different things. Maryland had a plan to spend the money and is spending it over time increments. The federal government said, go ahead, spend that money. But now Linda McMahon, Secretary McMahon, and Donald Trump essentially said, all that money you spent, which we promised to reimburse you for, just kidding, we're not going to reimburse you. Sorry. Actually, I don't think they said sorry. I think they just said, we're not reimbursing you, period. Is my understanding correct?
Too much time has passed. We can't justify that you should still be asking for extensions, was sort of the gist of it.
Even though that this is money paying for tutoring, paying for after-school activities, paying for all sorts of, different things that kids need to learn. So Maryland, I read this morning, it was $418 million that the Trump administration is just like, we're not giving it to you. What does that mean for our schools?
Well,
And am I right? Is that
yeah, no, we're trying to parcel it all out right now. So 418 million. Of that, we think 305 million has been spent and has been reimbursed potentially from the department down to the LEAs, to the local education agencies.
the State Department, not the
right,
federal department?
Right. And there has been some federal money that has come back from, there was like 3 big tranches of money, if you remember, the ESSER and ARP and all that. So, yeah, I mean, there are health suite improvements, there are ventilation projects, there are tutors in schools. All of these are programs that are still being funded with the end of those funds, and they are supposed to wrap up by 26. But the problem was we had lots of supply chain issues. That was a really big issue. So a lot of these construction projects are behind. So yeah, I mean, this is going to be a classroom hit.
So really what the Trump administration said is, here's another $418 million budget hit to your schools because you did what we said you should do, but now a new administration's in town and we're just going to change the rules on you and send you an email 3 minutes after the deadline.
I mean, it was absolutely absurd. And I mean, it is such a clear violation of just breaking a contract that if we don't prevail, this will really scare me.
And so you say prevail because I think there is a lawsuit.
Hopefully the AG will be entering into a lawsuit with the other state AGs against the department.
And the state superintendents, I'm sure they would provide expert testimony or would provide evidence or whatever, but it's likely going to go through the Attorney General's office.
Yes, that's what we're understanding right now. What we're doing right now is at the end of the letter, it had this really weird last 2 or 3 sentence that said, and if you want a waiver of the waiver, then you need to send a justification for your project. So
I'm going to ask 2 more questions, and we're going to go quick because I know our segment's running here. What are you hearing from superintendents just on the ground now? Not necessarily about the 418 million. I mean, maybe I'm sure that's what you're hearing, but what's just the general? You call up Superintendent X in a county and just say how's it going? What are you feeling? What's the response that you're getting?
Well, if we're talking specifically about the change in administration, I would say the immigration scare for families. I think we're seeing less families come to events at school. We had a real big uptick in absenteeism, because the parents were scared. What if I'm not here when my kid comes home? And I don't know that we'll see the full effect of that until next school year when we start to see kids enroll, and especially as we see kids enroll for free and reduced price meals, because people are really scared to put their name down on a piece of paper.
Oh, that's terrifying.
It is.
And I know we did a lot of work during Trump 1 about this and trying to safeguard it, but I don't think they care, and they're blowing past every safeguard that seems to be in place.
Yeah.
Let's hopefully pivot to something more positive in this haze. Maryland as a state continues to invest in education at record levels, led by Governor Moore, led by President Ferguson, Speaker Jones. They're continuing to invest in the blueprint for Maryland's future. What does it mean to have a state who views public education so diametrically opposed to how the federal government views it?
It's a relief, in one word. I think you have a systematic way of thinking about what's good for kids, right? And that's what the blueprint was. It was a very methodical, research-based initiative, and we have the money attached to it. So we're a little bit the envy of the country. When I talk to some of my peers around the country, they're like, wow, that's amazing. So I think one of the more difficult issues is that we need to keep educating new legislators on how we got here. That has been one of the most difficult things for me, is to remind people how we got here and why it's still important.
Great. Mary Pat, really appreciate you being here. We like to play games with guests. Usually they're really stupid, so we may cut this. It may be really dumb, and we'll see how it goes. But we're going to play a little game because you're working with superintendents in schools, is who would be the better student? Okay. I'm going to give you 2 people. You have to give me your snap judgment. Who would be the better student and why? You know what? Let's flip it. Let's go worst student, because I don't think you're going to love these folks.
Okay.
Who would be the worst student and why? And we'll do a couple of rounds of this. First round, Linda McMahon, Secretary of Education, or J.D. Vance, the current Vice President of the United States.
Ooh, J.D. Vance.
Why?
Because he's the smartest kid in the room that
Is usually wrong.
who's usually wrong, has no friends, and it talks too much.
So even though Linda McMahon covered up serial sexual assaulters, oops, was I not supposed to say that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Next two. Who would be the worst student? Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, or Mike Walls, the National Security Advisor who added Jeffrey Goldberg to the Signal chat?
Oh, gosh. I would say the latter, for sure. Yeah. I mean, who's using Signal at this point for that?
Marco Rubio just gives me such pick-me energy.
Yeah.
It's just so cringy of how bad it is. Let's do two Democrats out of love here. Who would be the worst student between Michael Bennett, former superintendent of Denver Public Schools, or we're going to go with Bernie Sanders, the current ranking member of the Education Committee?
Oh, as much as I like Bernie, I think he would be the worst student for some of the same J.D. Vance reasons. He would get on everybody's nerves. And
he's the good kind of rabble-rouser,
he's
though.
The good kind of, I love him.
As a teacher, he'd be very frustrating.
I think he would be a lot of energy for a teacher.
Yeah. I had students, and I actually love these students. I'm my favorite, but it was always like, prove it. I'm like, that's a really great question. I need to be able to do it.
My first grade teacher told my mom she has a lot of spirit. We just need to bend the spirit, not break the spirit. So I kind of put Bernie in that category.
And we'll do a final Maryland version here.
Okay.
So you can always plead the fifth here. We'll change it for you. Who would be the best student?
Okay.
And we're going to go County Executive Edition. Mark Elrich, Brandon Scott, Kelvin Ball, Jessica Fitzwater,
Oh my gosh.
Kathy Klossmeyer, or Aisha Braveboy, or Stuart Pittman. Who would be the best student of our Democratic county executives?
Oh, goodness gracious. I think Calvin Ball. I don't know. He just seems like he would listen, he would line up correctly, he would follow directions, and only ask appropriate questions.
I feel like there's some subcontext there that maybe when the cameras are off, we'll happily dive into. So Mary Pat Fannon, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the work you're doing with the state superintendents. I know corralling 24 state superintendents is not the easiest job in the world, especially with Trump actively trying to make their lives harder. So the work that you do for public education, the work that they do, please pass our thank you on to all the superintendents. And hopefully we'll have you back in a couple months and we'll say all this was for nothing and we won in court and it's great. But unfortunately, if it goes the other way, we'd love to have you back to talk about how we fight back against this.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest today, we are incredibly excited to have AFT President Randi Weingarten on Burn the Talking Points, someone who has been a leader, not just in education throughout the nation, but really the labor movement, the social justice movement, the civil rights movement. And so this is a perfect time, unfortunately, a perfect time to have this conversation with everything that's going on with the Trump administration and the Department of Education. So she said I can call her Randi, so I just want everyone that's listening to know. Randi, talk to us just a little bit about how you're viewing this moment that we're in with the Trump administration, their attacks on public education, their attacks on due process, on civil rights, on all of it, from your seat as a leader of one of the largest unions in the nation.
So first, Joe, thank you for having us on. And I think it actually boils down to opportunity all versus opportunity for some. And if you look holistically, if you take a look, and sorry, I am a social studies teacher, I'm a civics teacher, I'm also thank you, love civics, and think about, sorry to digress, but think about how hard it is to teach civics in a no child left behind, race to the top world where you have like 3 minutes to cover each part of the curriculum rather than delving deep. So part of the dilemma here is that we, that since World War II, we have like 3 different chunks of time in America. And post World War II, there was a commitment started by FDR, but then continued, about how the working class actually won the war. And the generals said, we're going to give back, including particularly Eisenhower, to the working class. And so you saw the increase of the labor movement, you saw the increase of college, you saw the GI Bill to get, for college. You saw this, and then you saw layered on top of that Johnson and the war on poverty, and then layered on top of that the civil rights movement. So you saw this arc going towards literally lifting up the American dream for people who are struggling and striving, as part of a thank you for keeping democracy, which was also really front and center. What then happened in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and I think that is the recipe for what's happening right now, is globalization, big tech, competition, and all of a sudden, those folks in the middle of the country, not just in the middle of the country, in my state, of upstate New York, the plants closed. These, the auto worker plants closed, the steel plants closed, the other manufacturing closed. So all of a sudden people are like, what the hell? What happened to us? What happened to our American dream? Why am I making less? Why do you tell me that if I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to make things go unless I go to college? So I think that all of this kind of came crashing down in 2024. And somebody like Trump, who basically is a really charismatic, good salesperson. I think he's a snake oil salesperson, but he's like, listen to me. I feel your pain.
Snake oil salesmen still sold things, so
I'm gonna make things better. As opposed to what Trump is really about, which is power and money for him and his friends. So I think there's a lot of other things that happen, but that's what really happened here. And I think what the challenge for the Democratic Party is if you are the party of the working class, then be the party of the working class. And you got to actually show that and prove that every single day, because as you and I both know, as teachers, it's not what's said, it's what's heard. And you got to meet people where they are. And you can't do it with facts and figures. You got to do it with emotion and connection and community. So, so you can see what he's doing. That's why I'll go back to opportunity for all. You can see what he's doing is basically opportunity for some. Fear, division, look this way, not this way. And it's basically, let's take out labor, even though he says he's for the working class. You see the litany of stuff that they have basically eviscerating.
What was it, the collective bargaining, eliminating it for public employees the other day?
For basically 1 million federal workers. But it's not just that. It's getting rid of OSHA, getting rid of NIOSH, getting rid of a bunch of other things like the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, the National Labor Relations Board not being able. So all the kind of agency that workers had in unions to do better for themselves, he cut all of that out. So it's getting rid of labor. It's the abolition of the Department of Education. So the 2 foundation stones, other than voting, that regular people really need to get ahead is a labor movement, collective bargaining, and education in terms of opportunity. And it goes right after that. So part of our job is to actually say the contrast. Look, I keep on saying, I say a lot, we're not going to rob Peter to pay Elon. And so part of our push has to be the contrast, and that is going to end up getting vindicated or not in elections. But part of it is because they got all the power now. But part of it is also a forward-facing way of saying we need to strengthen schools. We need to have more opportunity for collective bargaining. We need to have more collective action so that young people have that path to the American dream. And that's what Democrats have to do. They can't just be, no, we don't like Trump. They have to be, what is the vision for the future. And that starts with the labor movement and education.
I'm gonna jump around on some of our questions here, because I do want to talk about his dismantling of the Department of Education and his motives and things like that. But you said something that was really kind of on my mind, of this forward-looking vision, particularly around education and labor as two of the pillars that help move people into the middle class and keep them solidly, middle-class Americans who are able to achieve opportunity. As the 2028 campaign, believe it or not, is already starting to take shape, even before 26, and people start putting together their teams of folks to help come up with their visions and their policy and ideas. Is there anyone that's doing some innovative thinking around labor and innovative thinking around education that you think like, hey, these are folks that people really should be talking to?
Well, let me suggest there's a whole bunch of governors that are doing stuff around education that should be looked at. And frankly, there's a bunch of policy people that are starting to do this too. And it gets to 4 words that I've been playing with a lot: welcoming and safe, engaging and relevant.
Welcome, safe, engaging, relevant.
If we spend too much time as school teachers trying to explain ourselves in words that are kind of disconnected from regular people, like scaffolding, common core standards. If you're a parent, do you know what that means? Frankly,
Right.
I'm not sure I know what that means, and I taught AP government. So and so I can go on and on and on. If you don't use words that people say, that's what I want for schooling. So what I'm saying is, we want to make sure schooling, particularly in the post-COVID era, is make sure every school is welcoming and safe. We have to make sure our kids not just feel safe, God forbid there's gunshots, but feel safe when they walk into a school and say, I want to be there. Feel welcome. Parents feel welcome that a school is welcoming. So there's a lot of things to do to get to that point. And it's a whole lot better way of explaining what social emotional learning is than talking about social emotional learning. It's like, how do we make sure that kids feel like they want to be there, and parents feel like they want to be there, and teachers feel like they are safe and welcome there? That's one. Number 2, and I've seen this. I was lucky enough to teach in the 1990s, before No Child Left Behind. Yes, we had curriculum for the state, the regents. We had to make sure in 11th grade social studies in New York, we had to make sure we covered that curriculum. But I had time to dwell on things. So I spent a lot of time, I was a labor person. I spent a lot of time talking about, robber barons or captains of industry, and really trying to get kids to think about what happens in, as industry was created in the United States, and was it fair? And because you want to create something that's critical thinking, you want to create something that's interesting, you want to push kids to problem solving and to doing all that. And right now, I would say it's even more important. 60% of kids that graduate from high school don't graduate from college. 40% don't even go to college. So why are we not thinking about high school as 2 kinds of pathways? College prep pathway, always really important, but a career tech pathway. And why are we not giving those opportunities to all kids? Because think about it, 4 million jobs in healthcare. Why are we not doing that kind of work in high school so that kids have more agency? And, parents want this. They want the practical skills for kids. Kids want schools to be more relevant for them. So that's why I'm saying, let's think about schooling. And I'll finish the thought by saying, and a bunch of governors are now doing this, but we have to do it at scale. We do college prep at scale. We have to do career prep at scale. We have to actually have real apprenticeships, not after high school, but during high school, so that kids can actually make money. They're working at McDonald's. Why can't they make money as part of an apprenticeship program where they're getting a skill?
I could not agree more. And I'm going to give a shout out a little bit to Maryland, who I think is thinking about this similar to you with the blueprint for Maryland's future and with Governor Moore's leadership and President Ferguson and Speaker Jones. We're in the early years still of the blueprint, but I think the college and career tracks or college and career pathways is something that there's a lot of fruit on those trees that I think will hopefully see a lot of yields, to throw a bunch of metaphors together here.
Completely agree with you. Look, I'm the social studies teacher, so the English metaphors go well beyond me. But the other thing is this: what Governor Moore did with service internships is really important. I mean, I used to get laughed at when I said years ago, I think we should have a service requirement for all. There should be a gap year, not just for rich kids. Why can't we actually figure out a service year? So, kids sometimes go in the armed forces, but what if they did a service year? But they got to get paid for it, because you have to acknowledge that most people are not born with a silver spoon in their mouths. And there has to be the opportunities, not just for rich kids. I don't begrudge rich kids, but for all kids.
I mean, life opportunities and life circumstances are real. It's very similar to kind of how I think some of the conversation around internships in Washington, D.C. have evolved around this idea that, you need to pay your interns in Washington, D.C. Folks, it's an incredibly important experience. It's how networks are built and career opportunities are had. And if it's only folks whose parents can pay for their room and board and, pay for them who, not to work for 8, 10, 12, 14 weeks in a summer, you're just not getting the diversity of ideas that is going to make this nation and these offices stronger. So I really like kind of how you're thinking about career opportunities and pathways and service, and appreciate the shout out to Governor Moore, because I think he is leading the conversation on service in this country. So let's talk education and all of the amazing things happening at the federal level. So Trump signed his executive order essentially to dismantle the Department of Education. He knows he can't shut it down constitutionally, but he can hollow it out, or quote unquote, starve the beast until it no longer can function. Moved essential functions into other departments. What do you think his end game is? Why this fixation on gutting the Department of Education?
Well, I think it's the billionaire friends and bullies that he has that are around him. If you look at Heritage and the Project 2020, the Project 2025 report, they basically say dismantle the Department of Education, and this is the and that is frankly more important to me, get rid of Title I, block grant Title I. Because what the department, so part of it is political, because, they have this view that Jimmy Carter gave the Department of Education to the NEA. Frankly, the AFT actually opposed the creation of the Department of Education. We thought it should stay in HEW, because of the expertise, but B, because kids needed the protection of their parents as part of it. That don't isolate education from families. How prophetic is that right now? But now you have, the department created a lot of expertise and did a very good job in terms of the distribution of particularly Title I and the other dollars, not to states, but directly to schools. And so this kind of dismantling of the federal role essentially means get rid of the money, which is basically 1 out of every $9 that we spend in education comes from the federal government. So either get rid or retrofit the money. So question, what's going to happen to that kid in Baltimore who's getting a summer school or an after school program funded by Title I? What's going to happen to that? What's going to happen to the reading specialists or the librarians? We talk a lot about how we need to increase literacy rates. What's going to happen to those reading specialists who are funded by Title I? What's going to happen to the paraprofessionals who work with kids with disabilities who are funded by IDEA? So this money actually really matters. It fills opportunity gaps. So number one, it's the money. And number two, which I think is also why the extremists really hate the Department of Education is they call balls and strikes on the issues of discrimination. The
Yeah.
Office of Civil Rights. So if you're a parent and you don't think your kid is getting a decent education, and you think it's because your kid is, or you are, in a African American or Latino or Jewish, and you get to go to the Office of Civil Rights and say, you got to help me. And I think that what's happened is, if you look at the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you look at all this, they really want to erase the 21st century. They want to
Yeah.
erase everything that happened since Brown versus Board of Education. So I think
I mean,
it's
they've openly
both.
talked about repealing the Civil Rights Act.
Yeah,
Like
I think. Yeah,
they're
I
saying the
think it's
quiet part out loud.
exactly. I think it's both those things. I think that there's a sense of, we want the world. I mean, this is them, not me. We want the world to go back to what it was in the 1920s, the 1950s. And, frankly, no society grows when you go backwards instead of forwards. No society grows when you try to otherize or undermine the other. We have to actually lift everyone. I mean, and that's but there's a lot of this there's a lot of this fear and loathing in order to basically keep people fighting against each other, so that the rich and the powerful can continue to have the power that they have as the country actually becomes more diverse. So we're really in that fight about the soul of the country. And if you take away education, what you're doing is you're taking away helping kids have agency to actually think for themselves, to actually problem solve for themselves, to actually have the tools to fight propaganda, to discern fact from fiction. And so when you take that away, it is undermining the knowledge that is needed for pluralism and for democracy, as well as the knowledge that's needed for individual kids to have the skills that they need for the life that they want.
Yeah. I have two final questions, and I want to end with something ideally aspirational in such a not happy time. So the first question, I want to hit on this idea of like reforming the system, which we talk about, and kind of the four words that you used, and the Trump administration's DOGE effort of like efficiency, which obviously everyone's for more efficiency, but the way they're doing it is just careless, it's hurtful. But there are things in education that I think we would all agree we do want to change. But when they start touching it, their motives are so impure that it's hard to even consider working with them, because their end game isn't whatever they're saying out loud. They might be saying we're trying to make education outcomes for kids better. We're all for that, but we know they don't actually care. So like, how do we operate in a system where we all agree that we do want to make some changes with an administration whose public stance and private stance are not ever aligned? Does that question make sense? I'm struggling like with this, holding all these competing ideas in my brain about working with them with competing motives.
Look, I said from the moment that Linda McMahon was announced, I said, we share a love for career tech ed and for actually having parallel pathways in high schools. Do you think we've ever gotten a phone call from her?
I'm going to
Never.
guess no.
Yeah. I mean, she's told, there's been people who have asked me and I've said, fine, yeah, of course. But so, you gotta, of course, when you are a schools person, you have to figure out ways that you help kids succeed. You help kids thrive, regardless of what is thrown at you. And, and so you have to. And that's what teachers do all the time. I often say the teachers are better at MacGyvering than MacGyver. because that's what teachers do and that's what paras do. But what happens is you can detect, excuse me if I say it this way, you can detect bullshit when it's bullshit. And the problem is we are not in a truth atmosphere anymore. We're in a trust atmosphere.
Mhm.
And so, and there's lots of, um, um, so I think that the real way to answer your question is you build community. And of course you have to be open. I mean, I said this when I first became president of the AFT in 2000, I think 2008. I said the test for me for almost any reform is it good for kids and fair for teachers? And that virtually I would really, on behalf of the AFT, consider almost anything but vouchers because vouchers were defunding of public education.
Yep.
And so, yes, every school teacher, every classroom teacher will tell you they really hate the paperwork that is associated with all the testing. They
Mhm.
hate that we spend more time on collecting data than actually on using data, that the data seems to be the end of it in itself, as opposed to how do you help kids? So we would look forward to actually far more efficiency at any department. I want more efficiency at the AFT. We and teachers hate bureaucracy, frankly. But
Yeah.
there's a difference between effectiveness and efficiency and evisceration. And when you
Yeah.
basically get rid of every single person in the financial aid office except for one person, then you're basically saying, oh no, we don't want efficiency. And what's a financial aid office? It's what every parent actually needs to help
Right.
their kid have the financial aid to go to college. So you get rid of every single person but one. You're basically saying, we're not doing that anymore. That's evisceration. You take the the student loan applications off the website. You're basically saying we're getting rid of that. So
Right.
part of this is the trust of being able to talk about things in enough detail that you can basically say, okay, what they're saying, their top line, it's not what they mean. But it's
Yeah.
the trust, not the facts.
I mean, it's almost like what's the Reagan quote of like trust but verify. It doesn't even feel like there's the trust there. It's just engage and verify
Yeah.
almost at this point.
And frankly, parents know this, teachers know this, the public know this. Think about it. Of almost everything that Trump has done, six and a half, almost 7 of 10 people say no. Don't get rid of the Department of Education.
Yeah.
And it's not like anybody knows what the Department of Education does. How many times have I had to say in the last few weeks, states and local school boards
Yep.
actually control education and have since the Republic started. So
Right.
it's not but there's something queasy about it. People don't want to get rid of opportunity for the future. And
No.
that's top lines. That's what Trump is doing. Get rid of
Yeah.
opportunity for all. I mean, some people are going
Except
to have
billionaires.
opportunity.
Plenty of
Yeah, that's what
opportunity
I
for
was going to
billionaires.
say. Some people are going to have opportunity anyway, regardless. The billionaires, their kids are going to have opportunity regardless.
Yeah. When Trump said what was it, like, prices are going up, so what? Like, of course he doesn't care. Billionaires aren't going to feel the pain of his tariffs. Billionaires aren't going to feel the pain of cutting public education. Their kids don't care. They're set for life. So it's just really frustrating just how out of touch. So let me pivot to a question around fighting the Trump administration here. You recently, or the AFT recently, signed on to a lawsuit, or brought a lawsuit against the Trump administration withholding $400 million from Colombia. Can you talk a little bit about why that was important to go to court to fight, and just where it stands?
Right. So we did not, let me just make it clear. We did not
Okay.
sue Colombia. We
Right.
sued the Trump administration. And we have filed, look, I'm a lawyer and a teacher by occupation and avocation. And I probably have filed more lawsuits in the last few weeks than I think I've ever have in my entire
Yes.
legal life. But every single one of them has a through line of what is of harm to people, of harm not only to our members, but harm to people. So the one, for example, on the $400 million is there. Look, we talked about it earlier in your podcast. There's a process through OCR to actually, if there's anti-Semitism on campus, there's a process to challenge that. And I have friends, kids who go to Columbia. There were a lot of in my judgment, a lot of issues around ensuring that Jewish kids were safe, and Columbia didn't do it. And there's a process to do that and to deal with that. That process is not the McCarthyite process of bullying the college by taking away $400 million of research money that is used in the medical school, is used in the sciences, is used to actually help America get better, to have life-saving treatments, to cure cancer, to actually deal with loneliness. I mean, it's just, don't use something you ought not use. Don't bully people. Actually do the right thing. And that's what we said. We said you're basically threatening people. You're basically illegally violating the First Amendment rights and bullying people by taking appropriations that are already being spent for something else. Use the right process. Don't do things that hurt people. And so I'll give you another example. Another case that we did is the issues about the student loan applications not being on the website.
Yeah.
We said, no, you can't do this. This is a right that people have. 45 million people, have student loans that need to be serviced. Don't take it off the website. What are you doing? And that one, I mean, we have more in that case than that, but the Justice Department then forced the Department of Education to put the application back on. Doge, for example, taking people's personal financial information so that they can weaponize it. We have two injunctions now, one against the Ed Department, against Doge from taking that information from the Ed Department, and one from taking that information from retirees in Social Security. So every one of our lawsuits are, here's a harm that they're doing. It's not legal that they do this stuff. And let's try to use the courts to stop them from doing something that hurts people.
Yeah, that is. I'm glad we have folks in court fighting. Hopefully they follow the orders of the judges. I know it's a bit tenuous at some areas, but we're not going to dive into that today. Let me end with an aspirational question here. It is January, let's say, 7th, 2027. The Democrats have taken back the House. We have Speaker Jeffries. What is at the top of the education agenda for the new Democratic Congress?
The top of the education agenda is to they're not the president, so they're going to have to do the check and balances. But the top of the education agenda should be, this Democratic Congress wants to make sure that each and every person, each and every kid in America has a public school that is welcoming and safe, a public school where they have the kind of curriculum, they have the kind of after-school activities that actually helps kids thrive, that creates a community that is relevant and engaging. So a kid gets up in the morning and says, I want to go to school. That's the way you recreate a democracy. That's the way you recreate pluralism, because you're all in it together, fighting for opportunity for our kids, multiple different pathways. So even if Donald Trump says, no, I'm not going to do any of this stuff, you keep on fighting for it. And you do the check and balances as well. You don't let him take the money away from poor kids. You don't let him take the money away from kids with disabilities. You don't let him take the money away from kids who are going through career ed. You don't let him take the money away from kids who have Pell Grants. That's some of the check and balance you do. But have an outlook that says we are about all kids. A kid who wants to be a welder, a kid who wants to be a scientist, we're about all kids.
Fantastic answer. I appreciate that. President Randi Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers, thank you so much for joining Burn the Talking Points podcast. We'd love to have you on in the future when we start seeing where some of these shoes are starting to drop and talk more about it. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our guests today on Burn the Talking Points. Karen Darkes, our Executive Director, Mary Pat Fannon, Executive Director of the Public Superintendents Association of Maryland, and then Randi Weingarten, President of AFT National. A lot going on, Department of Ed, getting shut down. We're going to have more conversations about it. But stick around. We have a couple of special episodes coming up in the next 2 weeks that we are really excited to drop into your feed. Some really big special guests, and cannot wait for you to hear the conversations that we have with them. Once again, smash that subscribe button. Follow us on social. We appreciate everything you're doing. And if you have ideas for us, send them in. We're all ears.